Hello, everybody, and welcome back to our ethics and law class. Very exciting. So it's good to be back with you again. This is a great discussion and conversation today, and we began it last week in our discussion board, asking what were ethics, what were law, what are your views, your definitions, right? So this is, let me go back to the right slide. There we go. This is Chapter 2, Introduction to Ethics. I do not expect you to be an ethics philosopher at the end of this, but just a good, solid understanding. So there are 9 ethical theories, but we're not going to focus on all of them. You're welcome to read them. I'll go over a few of them anyhow, but really I want you to focus on Kantianism by a German named Kant. There's act and rule utilitarianism, social contract theory, and virtue ethics. Okay? This is just kind of a summary of what each is about. This is not in-depth and thorough, just a summary. That Kantianism is always about we should interact with people and always respect them because they are rational beings. It was part of the Enlightenment, right? They're rational beings, so we should respect each other. Utilitarianism would offer that we want to consider the consequences of the action, and we may even do a mathematical formula to determine whether it's good or bad. Social contract theory is a way to collectively promote human rights, right? And this is kind of like supportive of our life, liberty, and property rights. And virtue ethics, right? You can count on a good person to do the right thing. So we'll focus on those, but we'll look at some others. In the end, it's up to you. What kind of world do you want to live in? What kind of politician do you want to be? What kind of a mother or father or guide or coach or mentor, right? It's up to you. And we're going to, we're not going to go that deep, but we are going to try to apply those just a little bit to IT. Okay? So that's it. Now we'll get underway. Any man's death, the book starts out, I love this, diminishes me because I am involved in mankind. Therefore, never send to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. I think that kind of summarizes various aspects of those theories that we just talked about. So that's just a great line. It does completely express our dilemma and our joy, or somewhere in between, right? Communities provide us benefits, security, the exchange of goods, and these specializations result in higher productivity. So this is good, but there's a price, right? Communities prohibit certain actions and make other actions obligatory. So we have to balance our responsibilities and take the needs and desires of others into our decision making. People who take the ethical point of view may still disagree with you. The difference often lies somewhere between morality and ethics. So in the ethics point of view, right, communities provide these benefits. As I mentioned, more secure, the exchange of goods, right, productivity. And we want to understand these 2 ways to view the world. Potentially a selfish point of view or an ethical point of view, right, which is about respect other people and their core values. Okay, so the ethical point of view has a varying scales, which is the focus of this chapter. And some of the ethical approaches, in my view, are selfish, as we just noted in the last slide. So we'll discuss them a little bit this week, right? So defining some terms up front, a society is an association of people organized under a system of rules, and the rules of conduct, they describe what people ought not to do, right? And a morality is a person, involves a person that may simultaneously belong to multiple societies, right? And so it begins to get complicated as you weave in and out of these societies. And so we have this study of ethics, right, which incorporates the latest advances from our perspective in this course in information technology, right? Because people will selfishly exploit new technologies for personal gain. We'll talk about phishing and pornography and etc. So what's the morally good? What's the morally neutral? What's the morally bad? Now this is a slide from the book, and I love it. I just added some notes based on the book's emphasis or some of my own study, that ethics are like the balloons up above, right? So if we philosophically study, it's a philosophical study based on reason, right? Still, the various views make it hard for ethicists to agree, right? There's ethical theory 1, ethical theory 2. We're going to study those. Like I said, we'll concentrate on 4 primarily, right? So ethics is based on opinion and our own voluntary moral choices, right? As opposed to morality, which you see it down by the street. Morality are rules that benefit or harm others, like the rules of the road. Drive on the right side here in the U.S. Come to a complete stop at a stop sign. And so, comparing facts, we should be able to determine a stronger line of reasoning to balance these. Okay? So, why study ethics, right? Ethics is a way to decide the best thing to do, right? And new problems we're going to find are always coming up. That was one of the points of chapter 1, as you recall. Does technology impact us, or are we impacting technology, right? Things are coming up and the law doesn't keep up, or the morality or the ethics. All right, the morality, the rules, the ethics, the philosophical study based on reason, as we just said, right? So we want to learn together to apply some common wisdom that may not exist for these unique situations, okay? So ethics is the rational, symptomatic analysis of conduct that can cause benefit or harm to other people, as I mentioned. And there are options to consider, right? There are different conclusions. We can weigh the facts. The reasoning process behind our conclusions can be studied to determine a stronger line of thinking. So ethics is focused on this voluntary moral choices, right? It's a moral realm of benefit or harm to other people based on this reasoned rational choice, okay? Socrates did not put any of his philosophies in writing, but his student Plato did. And this is helpful to the discussions, for example, subjective relativism. Okay, so what we have is this ethical relativism, right? That there are no universal moral norms, and that we want to then compare this relativism versus subjective relativism or even cultural relativism. So in subjective relativism, each person decides right and wrong for themselves, right? There's no moral distinction between the actions of different people. Tolerance is not really the same thing as subjective relativism. Subjective relativism holds that individuals decide for themselves what is right or wrong. You are a tolerant person. It is okay with you if some people decide they want to be intolerant, but you're tolerant. But is it okay if others decide to be intolerant? Remember, in subjective relativism, each person decides right or wrong for themselves. So there was a case study of subjective relativism applied in the book. And it does seem to blur the lines between doing what you think is right and doing what you want to do, right? It really makes no moral distinction between the actions of different people. So the conclusion is that this is not really a workable theory. And then the literature touched on cultural relativism, right? So cultural relativism is the ethical theory that the meaning of right and wrong rests with society's actual moral guidelines. And it does not explain really how individual determines these moral guidelines, which is a problem. And it doesn't explain how to determine right from wrong when there are no cultural norms, which is where we find ourselves at often in the IT world. So culturalism does not really do a good job of characterizing the actions when moral guidelines evolve. And they did a case study and came to really the same conclusion. Not a workable theory. Review the slide in the case study in the book. Another one was divine command theory, right? Judaism, Christianity, Islam teach that a single God is the creator of the universe and that human beings are part of God's creation, right? Which is good. Jews, Christians, and Muslims all believe that God inspired the Torah. So divine command theory is based on the idea that good actions are those aligned with the will of God, and bad actions are those contrary to the will of God. Now, for example, thou shalt not kill. That's a command. Yet I would find in the conversation that in Christianity, as proposed by St. Augustine first and developed by others, there's this just war theory, right, that you can consider. So I'm not saying they're contradictory. I'm saying it takes a philosophical and moral approach to describe them accurately. That's all. And so there's this case for the divine command theory that we owe obedience to God, that God is all good and all knowing and the ultimate authority. Okay? But also, like anything, there are pros and cons, right? The case against it, right? There are many holy books. And when a society is made up of people with different religious beliefs, the society's moral guidelines should emerge from a secular authority, many would believe. That some moral problems are not addressed directly in scriptures, right? Like the internet, for example. And so divine command theory must resort to analogy on what appears in the sacred text in the insight of the person, right? For example, God is good. So trying to equate the two that are related but distinct things is called this equivalence fallacy. So instead the statement God is good means that there's an objective standard of goodness and that God meets perfectly, right? Which I think most of us would agree with. Okay? Okay. And so there's ethical egoism is another one, where basically each person should focus exclusively on his or her self-interest. Isn't that great? Well, it is practical. Just take care of yourself would be the point. Okay. But you have to ask, if it's easy, is it really the answer? Should we be doing it? Okay. I'm going to stop here, picking up with Kantianism when we come back.